The weather today is supposed to be rainy and cool. Perfect weather for baking. We've had very warm weather here in Southern California. Finally, we have a good baking day. So what I want to make today is one of my favorite savory pies, lamb and sausage pie. It's got a lot of flavor in it because besides the lamb, the sausages there's chorizo in there, which is a finely ground pork seasoned with a lot of chili powder and other seasonings. There's linguiça, which is a Portuguese sausage, and there's prosciutto, an Italian ham, and also plenty of onion in there. So let's make this lamb and sausage pie. What I have here is 1 pound, which is 454 grams of trimmed lamb. By trimmed, I mean that I took off most of the fat. You can't get every molecule out, but it's trimmed. And then I cut this rather small into 1/2 inch, 13 millimeter pieces. And what I want to do first is I want to salt it. This is before I start cooking. And then I want to season it with some freshly ground black pepper. Good enough. Get that into a bowl. And then I can start cooking, but I'm not going to start with the lamb. I'm going to cook my chorizo first, but I've got to wash my hands. I've got a skillet here heating on the stove. I'm going to put some what I call cooking olive oil. It's pure olive oil, not extra virgin, because extra virgin has a lower smoke point. It burns easily. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my chorizo in there. This is 4 ounces, about 113 grams of chorizo. I just want to get this thoroughly cooked. I'm turning my heat off under this because this cooks very quickly, a minute or two, because you can see how finely ground that is. I'm going to transfer this out of the pan and then start cooking my lamb next. Okay, I've got my heat back up under my pan. Going to start cooking my lamb. This will take longer, 4 to 5 minutes. I want to cook this through, make sure it's thoroughly cooked, and maybe even browning a little bit. So there's my lamb. It's just starting to brown. So I'm going to turn my heat off under that. That took about 6 minutes. Then I can transfer this out of the pan and start the onion. I've heated my pan back up again, putting my onions in. What I have here are 2 kind of medium onions, maybe medium to medium large. They're about 6 to 8 ounces each, or roughly 170 to 230 grams for each onion. And again, I have 2 of them. I'm going to saute these well. I want to get these not only cooked until they're tender and translucent, but I want to reduce as much of the moisture as I can because I don't want a lot of liquid in the bottom of my pie. My onions now have been cooking for just over 8 minutes. I'm going to add a couple of cloves of garlic here. And then cook this for another 2 minutes or so. All right, I'm happy with my onions there. And I should tell you that I started at a medium-high heat, and as I progressed cooking these onions down, I kept reducing my heat. I'm actually right down to low now because I don't want to brown the onions. I just want to cook the moisture out. So now I'm going to return my meat. This is the chorizo and the lamb. That to my pan. Bring my heat back up again to medium. I'm going to add, this is a 1/4 teaspoon of ground rosemary. And then I'm going to put about 1/2 cup or so of dry white wine in there. Bring this up to a boil and reduce my heat again, and I'm going to simmer this until most of that liquid has evaporated. Again, I want to get rid of the moisture because I don't want a lot of liquid in the bottom of my pie. Okay, so you can see my pan there now is pretty dry. If you have good ears, you can tell by the sound too. When you put the liquid in, you hear this kind of hissing noise. That's the liquid boiling off. But once the liquid boils off, the sound rather changes into a kind of a crackling sound. And that means you're starting to fry. Okay, what I've got here is 2 ounces of prosciutto that I've diced rather small, and I have 4 ounces of linguiça. 2 ounces of prosciutto is 57 grams. 4 ounces of linguiça, 113 grams. I'm going to stir all that in. You can see now what I'm talking about as far as a really savory, meaty filling. And I'm going to cook this for a couple of minutes longer. I just turned the heat off under this. This has been cooking for 2 more minutes. I've got my infamous red handled tasting spoon out. I just want to taste this for salt. That doesn't need any salt at all. That is wonderful. It's light on the salt, and I tend not to cook with a lot of salt anyway. So now I want to let this cool down because I'm going to be adding an egg to this. But I don't want the egg to cook just yet. I want the egg to cook when it's in a pie. Finally, I need to chop some basil. I have some fresh basil here. I like it when they have the root on it in the store because I can put it in water and it stays green and fresh. The leaves are a little bit small, but that's okay. All I need here is just a good pinch of basil. You could use dried basil if you don't have fresh. There, that's enough right there. And I want to just coarsely chop this up. And that's all. A good pinch there of fresh basil. For my pan, I'm using a springform pan. This is a 9-inch, which is about 23 centimeters. And then I've got a piece of parchment paper here. I'm going to take my ring off my pan, and then with it closed, I'm going to draw a line with a good dark pencil on the inside and flip that over, and that's going to be my guide for making my top crust. And what I'm going to be using for my pastry shell is Phyllo dough. I really like this for pastry shells. It makes a nice flaky crust. It's a bit messy to work with, but it makes a beautiful pie, and I think it's a lot easier than trying to make a flaky pie shell the traditional way. Now you're going to see why I have a circle on this. And again, make sure your parchment paper is pencil side down so you don't get pencil lead on your crust. This comes with 2 packages. By the way, this comes frozen. So the way to let it thaw is either overnight in the refrigerator or leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours with the envelopes out. I thawed mine in the refrigerator overnight. All right, this is a bit tricky to work with. Open the envelope here. And then, if everything went according to plan, this should all be wonderfully separate. Nothing stuck together. Look at that. That is beautiful. I love working with Phyllo dough. A little bit of sticking right there, but not bad. So there is my Phyllo dough. They're very, very thin sheets. I mean, they're paper thin. And then what I have here is I have a piece of fabric that I just lightly moistened with water. You don't want it dripping wet. You want it just barely moist. That'll keep that moist while I'm working with it. Okay, I'm actually going to start from the other side because this side was sticking less. Carefully lift a sheet off like that. Put my fabric on there. Now this tears really, really easily because it's so thin, but once I start building up, plane going overhead, I do live near the airport. Once I start building up my layers, it'll get stronger. I have clarified butter here. I find clarified butter is a little bit better because whole butter has up to 20% water and milk solids in it, and I don't want water in between my sheets because it'll cause the sheets to stick together. By using pure fat, and you could use olive oil on this if you wanted to. Then I'm going to fold that over, but I want to stay within the lines because this is going to give me the right size I need once cut for my top crust. Do a second sheet here. Nice, and I'm going to do this at a different angle. And the reason why is by crossing the grains in different directions, I'm actually building up strength. Kind of like plywood. The grain goes in different directions. Turn that over. And butter. Okay? So you see what I'm doing here. I'm going to use that whole envelope of phyllo dough and keep moving it around, doing it in different directions. Another reason why I like working with parchment paper is I can swing this around any which way I want. Once all that's on there, that's my top crust. Getting down to the very end here where some of these are sticking together, but that's okay. If they tear, by working in layers, you can hide the mistakes inside. I got a short piece here. This is actually 2 pieces. Again, who cares if it tears? It's all going to be inside. Another short piece here. And another jet going overhead. Look how that's tearing. Atlas, which is the brand I'm using, usually never fails me, but every once in a while I find a package that doesn't separate all that easily. But it really doesn't matter. See, it is a little bit messy to work with, but what really matters is the end product. And when you see this when it's finished, it'll be beautiful. Okay, one more piece to go on top here like that. I'm not going to butter that, I'm just going to press that down. And then I'm going to show you a trick. Take your ring, make sure that it's closed, press it down on top, and push down like so. And you'll make a line in your pastry shell. I'm using a pair of kitchen scissors because they come apart, they're easy to clean, and through paper and all. I'm just going to cut right around that line. Here it is. That is scrap. This is my top crust. I'm going to wrap that in plastic and I'll be ready to start building my bottom crust for my pastry. Now I'm ready to start doing my bottom crust. My springform pan is 9 inches across. The sides are 3 inches high. So figure 3 plus 9 plus 3 up the other side. That's 15 inches. My parchment paper is 15 inches wide, so I drew 2 more lines 15 inches apart. This is the area, but in a circle, that I need to cover. And I'm going to do this the same way that I did the top crust. I'm just going to be covering a bigger area. So my parchment I'm sorry, my phyllo dough isn't 15 inches wide. So obviously, I'm going to have to cover this in pieces all over the place, kind of do a patchwork here to build this up. It just takes a little bit of time, but it works very well. There, like that. This first step is always the most difficult because I don't have a lot of layers put down, so I have to be very careful. Any of these pieces that are sticking out, you can fold them over if you want, but not too much, because you want to make sure this is at least 15 inches wide. Okay, so you see what I'm doing here. I got the same thing to do all over again, but now I'm doing the bottom pie shell. Okay, I'm coming up at the end here. A little bit of sticking here and there, but not bad. Atlas brand usually works very well for me. If you have tearing, if it doesn't cooperate, again, just keep going, don't worry about it. Bury the mistakes inside. Obviously, you want the pieces to be whole enough that you can work with them. You don't want to be working with shreds, but I do occasionally run into some problems. Lots of planes going overhead today. Okay, my last sheet here. Beautiful. And I have, in the meantime, worth mentioning, I have been heating my oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 190 degrees Celsius. I filled my little bowl twice, one for the top shell and one for the bottom. And I would estimate that was about a third to a half a cup of butter each time. It all depends on how much you spread on there. All right, I'm done with that. I need to return to my filling before I put it in my pie shell. It's had time to cool down. I'm going to add 1 egg to this. That'll help to set it. And then here's the basil that I chopped earlier. And I'm going to just stir all this in and get this thoroughly mixed so that that egg is distributed evenly throughout all that filling. As I said, that'll help the filling to set up a little bit when it bakes inside the pie. Now, I want to get my springform pan assembled. This next bit can be a little bit tricky. Cover this meanwhile with plastic. You want to put your bottom shell inside, center it over there as best you can, and then just very carefully start easing it down inside. You've got all this extra around the edge that has to be evened in or eased in evenly around the edge. Press it down into the corner, but press it up against the sides. This is where it gets messy because around the edge here it's all dried out. All right, get the filling in there. And then press that down all the way around. Get it evened out. Here's our top crust that I had wrapped in plastic. I want to fit that down inside. And then I've got to make up an egg wash. So I have here an egg. I need a fork. I have, in the meantime, I've washed that pastry brush to get the fat out of it. Because now what I need is the liquid from that egg wash. And I'm going to go around the inside of the top first, this inside edge. Like so. Get that well covered with egg. Because I have to try to make this look neat now. Okay, and to do that, I'm going to just start folding this down to get rid of all of this rough edge. Kind of push it down inside. It's going to flake, but that's okay. That's, again, one of the beauties of working with Phyllo dough is it layers and you can cover a multitude of errors. Okay, once I get that first part in, again, a little bit more egg wash. And then I'm going to do it again. This time I'm going to kind of roll it down to form a border around the top, and it'll seal that top crust that I cut into place and give me a neater, it won't be perfectly clean, but give me a neater edge around the top. Like so. Meanwhile, my oven has come up to temperature. Okay, rinse my hands. Give them a wipe. And back to my egg wash again. Going to cover that top well and around the edges without getting, you don't want to get egg down into the sides between the pastry shell and the springform pan, because it could make it stick down inside of there. There's so much butter in this shell that it's not going to stick very much, and I'm using a non-stick springform pan anyways. And that's it. That is ready to go into the oven. This is going to bake 35 to 40 minutes. Again, the oven is 375 degrees Fahrenheit, 190 degrees Celsius. Okay, it has started to rain outside. I don't know whether you can hear it or not. I can hear it. There is my lamb and sausage pie. By using that egg wash on the top, that's what gives that top that nice browning. I'm going to let that rest now in my springform pan for about 10 or 15 minutes. It's very hot on the outside because it was in a 375 degree oven. But by letting it rest for a while, the heat will, some of it will migrate inward and even out the temperature inside, and of course some will dissipate. So I'll let this rest and then we'll cut it open and see what it looks like. While I'm waiting for things to cool down, I'm going to answer a couple of questions. I get questions occasionally on YouTube, and I try to answer some if I can, but some of them come from linked videos and there's no reply button. So you ask a question, but I can't reply to it. So I'm going to answer two of those questions today. One person asked, where do you get your aprons from? I don't buy them from anywhere. These are made. I get fabric sometimes from people around the world. I've got fabric over there that's from Italy, some is from Hawaii, some is from Washington State, some I bought. The aprons aren't available anywhere. They're custom made just for the videos. And then someone asked, where do you get your dishes from? I look around looking at clearance items in places like Sauté. There's an Italian pottery outlet down in the city. I look at their clearance items. Oftentimes, dishes that are too ugly to sell well. You wouldn't be proud to serve dinner guests on those dishes. Often it's those homely dishes that look really good in a photograph. They look unusual. I don't know why, but it works out really well. That the homelier a dish is, the better it looks in photography. So I have a good 30, 40 dishes out in the shed that are I call them my prop dishes for photography and videos. Okay, this usually comes out pretty easily, these pies. The ring comes right off easily. And that should just slide off beautifully. There it is. I'm going to cut into that and see what I've got inside. I want you to hear this crackling. I'm going to move my microphone down closer. Hear how beautifully crisp that pastry shell is. That's Phyllo dough. Makes beautiful pie shells. There is my lamb and sausage pie. Okay, it's raining outside. It's not even 70 degrees outside. It's a nice cool day, a perfect day for a nice hot savory pie. Cut a little bit for myself here. If I can get a hold of this. Here we go. See, I think the chorizo really blesses this dish. It gives that meat such a nice, not an overly spicy flavor, but just enough. That's a fantastic pie. And by the way, you can eat this warm or room temperature. I wouldn't eat it cold, but I like it either way, warm or at room temperature. So excuse me, I'm going to go enjoy my lamb and sausage pie. For a printable PDF copy of this recipe with step-by-step photographs, visit my website, mobilehomegourmet.com, and look on the home page or in the recipe archive.